In the dusty reservation lands of Arizona, a small house stands abandoned, its windows broken and roof sagging under years of neglect. This was once the home of Talon's parents, filled with laughter and Apache traditions. Now Talon has returned after years in the city, determined to breathe life back into these forgotten walls. The locals whisper that he's wasting his time. Nobody comes back to rebuild what the world has already forgotten. Yet day after day, Talon works alone, repairing timbers, sanding walls smooth, and planting seeds in the barren earth behind the house. As spring arrives, the first green shoots emerge from the soil. Something healing is happening in this place of memories. Could the garden Talon is creating become more than just plants? Could it restore an entire community's connection to their roots? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient bus wheezed to a stop at the reservation's edge, dust swirling through its open windows. Talon stepped down, his worn leather boots touching the red earth he had avoided for nearly a decade. He carried only a weathered duffel bag and the letter that had summoned him home. The bus pulled away, leaving him alone with the distant silhouette of mountains he once knew by heart. A turquoise stone pendant hung around his neck, his father's final gift. Talon's fingers found it instinctively as he surveyed the landscape. The reservation hadn't changed much, still suspended between two worlds, neither fully embracing nor escaping either. "Didn't expect to see you back here," came a gravelly voice. Old Man Jenkins leaned against his pickup truck, his face a roadmap of wrinkles beneath a sweat-stained cowboy hat. "Heard you were some fancy landscaper in Phoenix now." "Architect," Talon corrected, though it hardly mattered. "Landscape architect? Your parents' place has been sitting empty. Council's been talking about tearing it down." Talon nodded, hiding his wince. "I know. That's why I'm back." The 3-mile walk to his childhood home gave Talon time to prepare himself. Each step stirred memories, racing down this road as a boy, his mother calling him home as sunset painted the mesas gold, his father teaching him to read the stars. He'd been successful in Phoenix, creating elaborate gardens for wealthy clients, but something vital had been missing. His designs won awards, but felt hollow, disconnected from the earth in ways his mother would have immediately recognized. The house came into view like a wounded animal. Windows broken, roof sagging dangerously. The porch his father had built now partially collapsed. Yet something about its silhouette against the afternoon sky made his throat tighten. This was where his mother had sung traditional songs while tending her herbs, where his father had carved stories into wood late into the night. Inside was worse than he'd imagined. Desert winds had filled corners with sand. Mice had claimed territory. The kitchen where his mother had taught him about healing plants was now just splintered cabinets and a rusted sink. He set his bag down gently, listening to the silence broken only by the occasional settling of the damaged structure. In what had been his parents' bedroom, Talon found the photograph, half buried under fallen ceiling plaster, somehow preserved in its simple wooden frame. His parents standing proudly before their newly completed home. His father's arm around his mother's shoulders, her smile revealing the gap between her front teeth. Behind them, the house stood strong and new, a testament to determination and hope. Talon carefully wiped the dust from the glass, his reflection momentarily superimposed over his father's face. The resemblance startled him. When had he grown to look so much like the man he had run from becoming? A knock at the doorframe startled him. A woman about his age stood there, arms crossed, appraising him coolly. "I'm Grace Whitefeather." "Tribal Housing Committee." She glanced around critically. "You planning to actually fix this place, or just pay your respects and leave again?" Her directness was typically Apache. "No wasted words, I'm staying," Talon said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "For now," Grace nodded, unconvinced. "Committee gives condemned properties 3 months before forced demolition. Clock's already been ticking." After she left, Talon explored further. The backyard had become a tangled mess of tumbleweeds and scrub, but he could still trace the outline where his mother's garden had flourished. The irrigation system his father had cleverly designed was buried somewhere beneath years of neglect. As sunset approached, Talon cleared a small space on the floor of what had been his childhood bedroom. He laid out his sleeping bag, the desert chill already seeping through the broken windows. The photograph sat propped against his bag, his parents watching as he settled in for the first night. Sleep came fitfully, filled with half-formed dreams, his mother's hands in rich soil, his father's voice explaining how to find true north. The garden blooming impossibly in vibrant colors. Near dawn, he woke with absolute clarity. He knew what needed to be done. Not just repairs to wood and stone, but something deeper, a restoration that would begin with the earth itself. Dawn broke with Talon already awake, methodically assessing the damage. He moved through each room with his notebook, sketching layouts and making lists. The foundation remained surprisingly solid, his father's work. The roof would need immediate attention before the summer monsoons. Windows, plumbing, electrical, all required complete overhaul. As he pried up a warped floorboard in the kitchen, something gleamed beneath. A copper water dipper, its handle worn smooth from years of use. His mother's. She had used it to water her seedlings, insisting copper-touched water made plants grow stronger. The scientific mind he'd cultivated in college dismissed this, but something deeper in him remembered the vibrant growth that had always surrounded their home. He placed the dipper on the windowsill, where morning light caught it, transforming ordinary metal into something that seemed to hold sunlight itself. The hardware store in town had changed little. Bell above the door still announced customers with the same tinny ring. Mr. Bigay glanced up, recognition slowly dawning. Talon running bare. Never thought I'd see you back here. Need supplies? Talon replied. Sliding his list across the counter, Mr. Bigay whistled. That's quite a project. Your old place? Talon nodded. Most folks would bulldoze and start fresh. I'm not most folks. The older man studied him. No, you never were. Your father was the same way, stubborn as the mountains. As Mr. Bigay gathered supplies, a woman entered. Grace from yesterday, now in worn jeans and work boots, her long braid tucked under a faded baseball cap. She nodded curtly to Talon. Roof first, she said, eyeing his supplies. Unless you want the next rain to finish what time started. That's the plan. You'll need help. I work alone. Grace crossed her arms. Pride or stubbornness? Experience. Clients in Phoenix prefer not to see the mess of creation, just the finished product. This isn't Phoenix. She picked up a package of roofing nails. Wrong size for cedar shakes. You'll need these instead. She was right. Talon revised his list, while Mr. Bigay smiled knowingly. Back at the house, Talon began clearing the yard, uncovering the skeleton of his mother's garden beneath weeds and debris. The raised beds his father had built from riverstones still defined the space, though now filled with hard-packed earth. Near what had been the center, he uncovered a clay irrigation channel, part of the system that had once made this patch of desert bloom. Inside, he removed damaged drywall, revealing the house's bones. The post and beam construction remained mostly sound. His father had built this place to last generations, not decades. Late afternoon light slanted through broken windows as Talon cleared debris from what had been the root cellar. In the coolest corner, tucked into a small alcove in the stone foundation, stood 3 clay pots sealed with beeswax. His mother's seed storage. Opening one carefully, he found dark seeds still intact. Corn, he thought, though he couldn't be certain. The second contained smaller seeds, perhaps herbs or flowers. The third held beans, the traditional companion planting his mother had taught him about. 3 sisters, he murmured, recalling the lessons. Corn for structure, beans for nitrogen, squash for ground cover, the ancient trinity of native agriculture. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Grace stood in the doorway again, but this time with 2 thermoses and a paper bag. Thought you might need dinner. She handed him a thermos of coffee and the bag containing fry bread and stew. Council meeting tomorrow morning. They're discussing this property. Why tell me? Because you should be there. She paused, looking around at his day's progress. Not bad for city hands. After she left, Talon sat on the newly cleared porch, watching sunset paint the landscape in fire. The copper dipper caught the last light beside him. In Phoenix, he designed pristine gardens that never changed, perfect, sterile, and unchanging. Here was a different challenge, working with nature's cycles, not against them. He slept that night with the seed pots nearby, dreaming of green pushing through red earth, of water flowing through ancient channels, of his mother's hands guiding his own as they planted together. The tribal council meeting was held in the community center, a cinder block building with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a long table where 7 council members sat reviewing documents. Talon felt eyes on him as he entered, some curious, others openly hostile. Thomas Redhawk, council chairman, called the meeting to order. A powerfully built man in his 50s, wearing a crisp button-down shirt, his hair cut in a modern style. His wristwatch, a silver timepiece with turquoise inlay, caught the light as he gestured. The watch represented everything Talon found contradictory about Thomas: traditional materials in contemporary design, worn as a status symbol rather than with reverence. Item 4, property assessment of Lot 23. The Running Bear Place, Thomas announced. Recommendation is for demolition and land reclamation. I've begun restoration, Talon spoke up, standing. I inherited the property legally. Thomas barely glanced at him. The building has been vacant for 7 years. It's been declared a hazard. An elder at the end of the table, Wilson Blackhorse, hair in silver braids, squinted at Talon. Running bears, boy. You've been gone a long time. I'm back now. For how long? Thomas asked. Until you get bored with playing Indian? A murmur rippled through the room. Talon felt heat rise to his face, but kept his voice steady. I'm restoring my family's home and garden. There's nothing in the tribal code against that. The development plan, Thomas began, doesn't include my property, Talon finished. I checked the maps. Grace stood unexpectedly from her seat near the back. The Running Bear Garden was once a teaching place. My grandmother learned planting cycles there. There's cultural significance, Thomas frowned. We're talking about progress, not sentimentality. The council will deliberate and issue a decision. Outside, children watched from a distance as Talon worked on the roof, stripping damaged shingles. By mid-afternoon, 3 boys had edged closer, sitting on a boulder to observe. My grandpa says, nobody lived here 'cause it's haunted, the smallest boy called out. Talon smiled. Not haunted. Just waiting. For what? Another asked. For someone to remember. The boys eventually helped carry shingles up the ladder, eager for stories about the house. By sunset, half the roof was repaired. Talon's muscles ached pleasantly, different from the gym-toned fitness he'd maintained in Phoenix. As darkness fell, headlights swept across the yard. Grace's truck pulled up, Elder Wilson in the passenger seat. The old man made his way slowly to the porch where Talon had set up a camp lantern. Your father built this place with 7 men helping, Wilson said, easing himself onto a chair Talon quickly offered. You're doing it alone? Seems right, somehow, Wilson nodded. Thomas pushed that demolition order through last year. Been looking for investors to build vacation rentals. He pulled something from his jacket, a carved bone whistle, yellowed with age. Your grandfather made this. Used to play it when planting, said the seeds responded to music. Talon accepted it carefully. I don't remember him. He remembered you. Said you had medicine man hands, could feel what plants needed. Wilson glanced at Grace. Some on the council still respect tradition. We'll buy you time, but you need to show progress. After they left, Talon examined the whistle by lamplight. Intricate carvings depicted cornstalks and rain clouds. When he blew it gently, a soft, reedy note emerged. Not musical exactly, but somehow reminiscent of wind through summer leaves. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, Thomas and 2 men in business suits carrying clipboards. Environmental assessment, Thomas announced, not asking permission before stepping past Talon. Standard procedure. The men photographed everything while Thomas narrated. Structural integrity compromised. Potential contamination, insufficient sanitation facilities. One man paused at the newly cleared garden area, where Talon had begun turning soil. "What's happening here?" "Heritage garden restoration," Talon answered. Thomas snorted. "Playing in the dirt. Meanwhile, my development would bring jobs, tourism. This land has a history," Talon said quietly. "History doesn't pay bills," Thomas replied. "You have 30 days to bring this place up to code, or the demolition proceeds." That night a summer storm rolled through, thunder echoing off canyon walls. Talon sat on the porch, listening to rain test his roof repairs. No leaks, at least none he could detect. The bone whistle sat in his palm, its weight somehow comforting. In the morning, 3 more children appeared, then an elder with a walking stick who silently observed for an hour before leaving. By afternoon, 2 women brought corn stew and fry bread, studying the garden space with knowing eyes. Slowly, invisibly, something was shifting. The house was becoming a place again, not just an abandoned structure. Each nail driven, each board replaced was an act of defiance and remembrance. The soil told stories to those who knew how to listen. Talon knelt in what would become the garden, crumbling earth between his fingers. Too alkaline, too compacted from years of neglect. In Phoenix, he would have ordered truckloads of imported soil, chemical amendments, quick solutions. Here he needed to work differently. He began with compost, kitchen scraps from his simple meals, leaves, grass clippings. The children who now regularly visited brought offerings, apple cores, eggshells, coffee grounds from their parents' kitchens. Talon showed them how to layer the materials, explaining the alchemy that would transform waste into nourishment. "My mother called it feeding the earth so it can feed us," he explained. While the compost matured, Talon continued house repairs. The roof was now sound, windows reglazed. He'd restored the main support beam, a massive pine trunk his father had hauled from the mountains using traditional joinery rather than modern brackets. Grace arrived one morning with her truck bed full of salvaged lumber. "Demolition at the old trading post," she explained. "Thought you could use it." They worked together rebuilding the porch, her carpentry skills matching his own. During a water break, she studied the garden plot. "You're using the old ways," she observed. "Not many remember. My mother taught me. I forgot for a while." Grace nodded toward his careful compost piles. "Thomas calls this primitive, says modern agriculture is the reservation's future. And you?" She considered. "I've seen what chemical farming did to the western fields. Nothing grows there now." While digging irrigation channels based on his mother's design, Talon unearthed a small wooden box beneath a large cottonwood stump. The wood had protected it from decay. Inside lay a cedar flute, delicately carved with symbols of rain, corn, and hummingbirds. A note in faded ink, "For my son's son, to call the growing spirits." That evening, Talon attempted to play the flute, producing awkward, breathy notes that made the visiting children giggle. An elder passing by, Mary Littlecreek, paused to listen. "Your grandfather played beautifully," she said. "At planting festivals, at harvest gatherings." She settled onto the porch steps, uninvited, watching him with bright eyes. "You need to breathe from here," she tapped her diaphragm, "not from your chest." Under her instruction, Talon produced clearer tones. "Music helps things grow," Mary said matter-of-factly. "Plants, people, hope. We've had too little music here lately." The next day brought Thomas and an official-looking woman with a digital camera and clipboard. After she left, Talon sat on the newly cleared porch, watching sunset paint the landscape in fire. The copper dipper caught the last light beside him. In Phoenix, he designed pristine gardens that never changed, perfect, sterile, and unchanging. Here was a different challenge, working with nature's cycles, not against them. He slept that night with the seed pots nearby, dreaming of green pushing through red earth, of water flowing through ancient channels, of his mother's hands guiding his own as they planted together. The tribal council meeting was held in the community center, a cinder-block building with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a long table where 7 council members sat reviewing documents. Talon felt eyes on him as he entered, some curious, others openly hostile. Thomas Redhawk, council chairman, called the meeting to order. A powerfully built man in his 50s, wearing a crisp button-down shirt, his hair cut in a modern style. His wristwatch, a silver timepiece with turquoise inlay, caught the light as he gestured. The watch represented everything Talon found contradictory about Thomas: traditional materials in contemporary design, worn as a status symbol rather than with reverence. Item 4, property assessment of Lot 23. The Running Bear Place, Thomas announced. Recommendation is for demolition and land reclamation. I've begun restoration, Talon spoke up, standing. I inherited the property legally. Thomas barely glanced at him. The building has been vacant for 7 years. It's been declared a hazard. An elder at the end of the table, Wilson Blackhorse, hair in silver braids, squinted at Talon. Running bears, boy. You've been gone a long time. I'm back now. For how long? Thomas asked. Until you get bored with playing Indian? A murmur rippled through the room. Talon felt heat rise to his face, but kept his voice steady. I'm restoring my family's home and garden. There's nothing in the tribal code against that. The development plan, Thomas began, doesn't include my property, Talon finished. I checked the maps. Grace stood unexpectedly from her seat near the back. The Running Bear Garden was once a teaching place. My grandmother learned planting cycles there. There's cultural significance, Thomas frowned. We're talking about progress, not sentimentality. The council will deliberate and issue a decision. Outside, children watched from a distance as Talon worked on the roof, stripping damaged shingles. By mid-afternoon, 3 boys had edged closer, sitting on a boulder to observe. My grandpa says, nobody lived here 'cause it's haunted, the smallest boy called out. Talon smiled. Not haunted. Just waiting. For what? Another asked. For someone to remember. The boys eventually helped carry shingles up the ladder, eager for stories about the house. By sunset, half the roof was repaired. Talon's muscles ached pleasantly, different from the gym-toned fitness he'd maintained in Phoenix. As darkness fell, headlights swept across the yard. Grace's truck pulled up, Elder Wilson in the passenger seat. The old man made his way slowly to the porch where Talon had set up a camp lantern. Your father built this place with 7 men helping, Wilson said, easing himself onto a chair Talon quickly offered. You're doing it alone? Seems right, somehow, Wilson nodded. Thomas pushed that demolition order through last year. Been looking for investors to build vacation rentals. He pulled something from his jacket, a carved bone whistle, yellowed with age. Your grandfather made this. Used to play it when planting, said the seeds responded to music. Talon accepted it carefully. I don't remember him. He remembered you. Said you had medicine man hands, could feel what plants needed. Wilson glanced at Grace. Some on the council still respect tradition. We'll buy you time, but you need to show progress. After they left, Talon examined the whistle by lamplight. Intricate carvings depicted cornstalks and rain clouds. When he blew it gently, a soft, reedy note emerged. Not musical exactly, but somehow reminiscent of wind through summer leaves. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, Thomas and 2 men in business suits carrying clipboards. Environmental assessment, Thomas announced, not asking permission before stepping past Talon. Standard procedure. The men photographed everything while Thomas narrated. Structural integrity compromised. Potential contamination. Insufficient sanitation facilities. One man paused at the newly cleared garden area, where Talon had begun turning soil. What's happening here? Heritage garden restoration, Talon answered. Thomas snorted. Playing in the dirt. Meanwhile, my development would bring jobs, tourism. This land has a history, Talon said quietly. History doesn't pay bills, Thomas replied. You have 30 days to bring this place up to code, or the demolition proceeds. That night a summer storm rolled through, thunder echoing off canyon walls. Talon sat on the porch, listening to rain test his roof repairs. No leaks, at least none he could detect. The bone whistle sat in his palm, its weight somehow comforting. In the morning, 3 more children appeared, then an elder with a walking stick who silently observed for an hour before leaving. By afternoon, 2 women brought corn stew and fry bread, studying the garden space with knowing eyes. Slowly, invisibly, something was shifting. The house was becoming a place again, not just an abandoned structure. Each nail driven, each board replaced was an act of defiance and remembrance. The soil told stories to those who knew how to listen. Talon knelt in what would become the garden, crumbling earth between his fingers. Too alkaline, too compacted from years of neglect. In Phoenix, he would have ordered truckloads of imported soil, chemical amendments, quick solutions. Here he needed to work differently. He began with compost, kitchen scraps from his simple meals, leaves, grass clippings. The children who now regularly visited brought offerings, apple cores, eggshells, coffee grounds from their parents' kitchens. Talon showed them how to layer the materials, explaining the alchemy that would transform waste into nourishment. My mother called it feeding the earth so it can feed us, he explained. While the compost matured, Talon continued house repairs. The roof was now sound, windows reglazed. He'd restored the main support beam, a massive pine trunk his father had hauled from the mountains using traditional joinery rather than modern brackets. Grace arrived one morning with her truck bed full of salvaged lumber. Demolition at the old trading post, she explained. Thought you could use it. They worked together rebuilding the porch, her carpentry skills matching his own. During a water break, she studied the garden plot. You're using the old ways, she observed. Not many remember. My mother taught me. I forgot for a while. Grace nodded toward his careful compost piles. Thomas calls this primitive, says modern agriculture is the reservation's future. And you? She considered. I've seen what chemical farming did to the western fields. Nothing grows there now. While digging irrigation channels based on his mother's design, Talon unearthed a small wooden box beneath a large cottonwood stump. The wood had protected it from decay. Inside lay a cedar flute, delicately carved with symbols of rain, corn, and hummingbirds. A note in faded ink, for my son's son, to call the growing spirits. That evening, Talon attempted to play the flute, producing awkward, breathy notes that made the visiting children giggle. An elder passing by, Mary Littlecreek, paused to listen. Your grandfather played beautifully, she said. At planting festivals, at harvest gatherings. She settled onto the porch steps, uninvited, watching him with bright eyes. You need to breathe from here, she tapped her diaphragm, not from your chest. Under her instruction, Talon produced clearer tones. Music helps things grow, Mary said matter-of-factly. Plants, people, hope. We've had too little music here lately. The next day brought Thomas and an official-looking woman with a digital camera and clipboard. Grace arrived later with disturbing news. Thomas called a special council meeting. He's proposing an easement through your property for essential infrastructure development. Can he do that? Maybe. There's a clause in tribal law about community need overriding individual property rights. She hesitated. There's more. The spring that feeds your irrigation system. He's claiming it's a community water source that you're diverting. Talon showed her his mother's journal. This documents decades of water use from that spring for this garden. It establishes historical rights. Grace studied the journal carefully. This could help. But Thomas has convinced half the council that your hobby garden is preventing economic opportunities for everyone. That night, Talon read his mother's journal by lamplight. Between practical notes on planting depths and harvest times were deeper observations. The garden teaches patience. Seeds remember what we forget. Our hands remember what our minds do not. Morning brought unwelcome visitors. 3 teenagers stood at the edge of the garden, faces set in deliberate indifference. My dad says you're blocking progress, the tallest boy said. Is that what you think? Talon asked, continuing to thin the corn seedlings. The boy shrugged. Dad says the resort would bring jobs, better than playing in the dirt. Your ancestors played in this dirt for thousands of years. It fed them, healed them. Talon stood, offering a handful of thinned seedlings. Plant these somewhere. See what happens. The boys left without taking the plants but returned after dark. Talon heard the commotion from inside the house. Breaking plants, laughter, retreat. In the morning he surveyed the damage. Trampled beds, uprooted herbs, irrigation channels disrupted. News spread quickly. By mid-morning, a dozen community members arrived. Elders, parents with children, college students. Without being asked, they helped repair the damage. Replanting what could be saved, rebuilding what was destroyed. Grace worked alongside Talon, carefully resetting dislodged stones in the irrigation channel. Thomas's son was among them, she said quietly. This wasn't random vandalism. Elder Wilson arrived with several tribal council members. They walked the property, examining the garden and the damage. One councilwoman knelt to help a child replant an uprooted herb. "My grandmother grew this," she said. "Told me it cured her father's cough when Western medicine couldn't help." By sunset, the garden was largely restored. People lingered, sharing stories triggered by different plants. Talon realized something important had shifted. What had begun as his solitary project had become community property in the best sense, a shared heritage reclaimed. That night, alone with his mother's journal, Talon read, "Gardens are never just about plants. They're about relationships, between people and earth, past and future, what is lost and what might be found again." He traced her handwriting with his finger. She had known all along what he was only now discovering. The easement hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Talon had more immediate concerns. The summer solstice approached, a time his mother had always marked with special plantings and blessings for the garden. Her journal detailed rituals he only vaguely remembered, ceremonies that honored the earth's turning and the sun's peak strength. While sorting through a box of his father's belongings, Talon found a bundle wrapped in faded cotton cloth. Inside lay a carved wooden dragonfly, its wings outstretched as if in flight. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every detail rendered with precision, the wood polished to a soft glow from handling. A small note in his father's handwriting, "Waterbringer." For the garden's heart, Grace examined it with reverence when she visited later that day. "Your father was known for his carvings. This is special even for him. Dragonfly brings water in our stories," Elder Wilson added, having arrived with several other elders to check on the garden's progress. "Places it near water, and water comes." Talon positioned the carving on a post at the garden center, where the main irrigation channels converged. The wooden insect seemed to hover protectively over the growing plants. That afternoon, unexpected visitors arrived, 3 professors from the State University's agricultural department, accompanied by Grace's cousin, who worked in tribal administration. "We've heard about your heritage gardening project," the lead professor explained, a woman with sun-weathered skin and practical hiking boots. "The drought-resistant techniques you're implementing have significant research value." They toured the garden, asking detailed questions about watering schedules, companion planting, and seed preservation. Talon showed them his mother's journal, watching their excitement grow as they recognized the detailed generational knowledge it contained. "This is exactly what our native agricultural preservation project is documenting," the professor said. "These methods could help address food security issues across the Southwest." Before leaving, she handed Talon an official letter. "We'd like to designate this as a research partnership site. It comes with grant funding for expansion and documentation." Talon read the letter carefully. "This would open the garden to student researchers. With your oversight, of course. The goal is to preserve indigenous agricultural knowledge before it's lost completely." She gestured toward the thriving plants. "What you're doing here isn't just about history, it's about sustainable future practices." The university partnership changed everything. Suddenly, what Thomas had dismissed as playing in dirt had academic validation and outside funding. When news spread, more community members came forward with seeds their grandparents had preserved, planting techniques remembered from childhood, songs and stories about growing cycles. Thomas, however, intensified his campaign. Flyers appeared throughout the reservation, promoting economic opportunities and job creation through the resort development. They prominently featured the access road that would cut through Talon's property. 3 days before the easement hearing, Talon awoke to find someone had tampered with the spring that fed his irrigation system. Rocks had been deliberately placed to divert water away from the channel feeding his garden. It took hours of careful work to restore the flow. That evening, an unexpected ally appeared. Thomas's teenage son stood awkwardly at the garden's edge, hands shoved in pockets. "I didn't wreck your water," he said immediately. "That wasn't me this time," Talon nodded. "I believe you." The boy studied the garden, eyes lingering on the corn now tasseling. "My grandmother used to grow corn like that. Before she died. Would you like to learn how?" Talon offered. The boy shrugged with elaborate casualness. "Maybe." He hesitated. "My dad's really angry about the university people. Says you're turning everyone against progress." "There are different kinds of progress," Talon replied. The day before the hearing, Elder Wilson organized a gathering at the garden. What Talon had expected to be a small ceremony became something larger. Dozens of community members arrived bringing food, stories, and support. Someone brought a drum, another a traditional flute. The garden became a place of celebration. Grace stood beside Talon as they watched children playing between the carefully tended rows. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "you've already succeeded." People remember now. Under the stars, with the carved dragonfly watching over growing plants, Talon felt a completeness he'd never experienced, designing manicured landscapes in Phoenix. This garden was alive, not just with plants, but with stories, with connections between generations, with hope taking root alongside heritage seeds. The wooden dragonfly caught moonlight on its wings, seeming almost to move in the gentle breeze. Waterbringer, Heartkeeper. His father's hands had created it, just as Talon's hands now created something his parents would have recognized. Not just a garden, but a continuation. The easement hearing transformed unexpectedly when 3 tribal elders presented historical maps showing the disputed road had originally been a ceremonial path to a nearby sacred site. This designation carried special protection under tribal law. The council voted to table Thomas's request pending further investigation, a procedural victory that granted Talon precious time. July brought scorching heat and the garden's first substantial harvests. Early corn, tender squash, herbs in abundance. Talon established Saturday morning as community harvest time, teaching proper gathering techniques to ensure continued production. Children eagerly collected ripe vegetables, while elders shared stories of how these same foods had sustained their families for generations. While clearing an overgrown section to expand the garden, Talon uncovered a smooth stone basin half buried in earth. Roughly the size of a large serving bowl, its interior was polished from years of use. Grace's grandfather identified it immediately. "Grinding stone," Joseph explained, running weathered hands over its surface. "For corn, for medicines. Very old. See these markings around the edge? Prayers for good harvests, for healing." Talon cleaned it carefully and placed it near the garden entrance. By unspoken agreement, people began leaving small offerings beside it. A perfect ear of corn, fragrant bundles of herbs, occasionally a carved token. The stone basin became a tangible connection between those who tended the garden now and those who had done so in the past. The university partnership flourished. Students documented traditional planting techniques, water conservation methods, companion planting strategies. "We've lost many of our traditional seeds," their elder explained. "Our grandparents were forced to farm commercially. The old varieties disappeared." Talon showed them through the garden, identifying each plant, explaining its needs and uses. Before leaving, he shared seeds from his best producers: corn, beans, squash, herbs, continuing a tradition of exchange that predated modern borders. "The plants remember where they came from," he said, echoing his mother's words. "They'll grow strong for you if you remember too." That night, alone with Grace on the porch, Talon voiced the question that had been growing in his mind. What happens when summer ends? When the garden goes dormant? Grace considered. The work continues. Seed-saving, planning, teaching. She studied his profile in the fading light. Unless you're planning to leave again. I'm not, he realized, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. The following day brought Thomas to the garden, his first direct visit since the easement hearing. He arrived alone, expression unreadable as he surveyed the thriving plants, the visiting students taking measurements, the children helping with morning watering. Impressive, he admitted reluctantly. Different from what I expected. Talon continued thinning carrot seedlings, giving Thomas space to continue or depart. The resort developers are getting impatient, Thomas finally said. They've increased their offer, significantly. He named a figure that made Talon pause. Enough to set up a modern agricultural center elsewhere. Climate-controlled greenhouses. Irrigation systems. Real progress. Talon glanced at the grinding stone with its small offerings. At the children carefully watering seedlings. And the elders sharing knowledge with university researchers. This is real progress, he replied quietly. Just not the kind that shows up on quarterly reports. Thomas studied the carved dragonfly on its post, the careful layout of companion plants, the subtle integration of old and new techniques. Something shifted in his expression. Not surrender, but perhaps recognition. My son asks about your planting methods, he said finally. Keep seeds in jars in his room now. It wasn't a concession, but it was an acknowledgement. As Thomas left, Talon returned to his work, hands in the soil that had sustained his family for generations. The grinding stone caught afternoon light, its smooth depression a testament to countless hands that had worked in this same earth. Growing food, preserving tradition, nurturing both plants and community. August brought unrelenting heat. Cloudless skies and troubling news. The regional drought, already in its third year, had worsened. Water restrictions were implemented across the reservation. Households received rationed allotments, but agricultural use faced severe cutbacks. Thomas pushed the emergency measures through council last night, Grace explained, showing Talon the notice. All non-essential agricultural water use suspended until further notice. He's defining what's essential, Talon guessed. Grace nodded grimly. Commercial farming operations are exempt. Heritage gardens aren't specifically mentioned. That afternoon, a tribal official arrived to place a flow restrictor on the spring that fed Talon's irrigation system, reducing it to a trickle. The timing couldn't have been worse. Corn was tasseling, squash vines heavy with immature fruit, bean plants loaded with pods. The garden required consistent moisture during this critical period. While searching the shed for smaller irrigation components to maximize the reduced water flow, Talon discovered a tarnished metal object wrapped in oilcloth behind stacked lumber. It was a hand pump, old but solidly made, its handle worn smooth from use. His father had mentioned a secondary water source, a shallow well his grandfather had dug by hand, but its location had been lost to memory. Elder Wilson, hearing about the pump, nodded in recognition. Your grandfather was known for finding water, had a gift for it. He studied the garden thoughtfully. The well would be near where he built his sweat lodge. Northeast corner, if I remember right. Talon, Grace, and several community volunteers spent a day carefully excavating the area Wilson indicated. Near dusk, their shovels struck wood, a buried well cover perfectly preserved beneath 2 feet of soil. The well itself was stone-lined, narrow but deep, with sweet, clear water about 12 feet down. The hand pump was cleaned, restored, and connected. By morning, a modest but steady flow of water fed the irrigation channels. The garden had a reprieve, but Talon knew the solution was temporary. The well's capacity was limited, and overuse would drain it quickly. He implemented water conservation techniques from his mother's journal. Clay pot irrigation buried among plant roots, deeper mulching with straw to retain soil moisture, protective companion planting to create microhabitats that reduced evaporation. The children who regularly helped in the garden became expert water monitors. Checking soil moisture before applying precious drops, Thomas arrived unannounced during this crisis. Observing the creative adaptations without comment, "You're circumventing the restrictions," he finally noted. Gesturing toward the hand pump, "I'm using a historical water source that predates current allocations," Talon replied. "My grandfather dug this well by hand." "The council won't see it that way." "Then maybe the council needs to see what's actually happening here." Talon gestured to the university students documenting drought-resistant growing techniques, the children learning water conservation, the elders sharing knowledge about plants that thrived with minimal irrigation. Thomas frowned. "This isn't about your garden specifically. Water is a community resource. The resort developers have detailed sustainability plans for swimming pools and golf courses," Talon interrupted, "while food plants die." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of the university professor with unexpected guests, representatives from a state agricultural commission studying drought resistance. They had come specifically to document the Heritage Garden's water conservation techniques. "These traditional methods show remarkable efficiency," the professor explained to Thomas, "potentially valuable for regional food security during prolonged drought." Thomas departed without further comment, but the damage was already done. Despite all efforts, the garden showed signs of stress. Corn leaves curled in the relentless sun. Younger seedlings withered despite careful tending. The reduced water flow couldn't meet the garden's needs during peak summer heat. That evening, the garden's regular helpers gathered to discuss options. Elder Wilson suggested traditional rain-calling ceremonies. University students proposed temporary shade structures. Children volunteered to carry household water to their favorite plants. "We're losing ground," Talon admitted to Grace later, after others had departed. They sat on the porch steps, watching heat lightning flicker on the distant horizon, teasing promise of rain that never came. "Maybe Thomas is right," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm being selfish with resources during a community crisis." Grace shook her head firmly. "This garden feeds people, preserves knowledge, teaches children. That's not selfish." She gestured toward the stressed but still living plants. "They're fighters, like their caretaker." That night, Talon dreamed of his mother singing to the garden during a long-ago drought. In the dream, her voice called clouds from empty skies, coaxed moisture from reluctant air. He woke to darkness, the memory of her song fading but its purpose clear. Before dawn, he carefully distributed the well's limited water, prioritizing plants that couldn't be replaced, rare heritage varieties, medicinal herbs, 3-generation seed stock. Some sections would have to be sacrificed to save others. A painful triage that felt like betrayal as the sun rose, harsh and unforgiving. Talon heard distant thunder, not heat lightning this time, but the deep rolling promise of actual rain. Dark clouds gathered over distant mesas, moving slowly but steadily toward the reservation. The garden might yet survive, the storm delivered. Rain fell steadily through the night, gentle enough to soak the thirsty earth without causing erosion. The garden's carefully designed channels captured and directed the precious moisture, while clay pots buried among root systems slowly released stored water in the days that followed. Plants that had been wilting straightened, their leaves unfurling toward the sky once more. "Perfect timing," Elder Wilson observed, helping Talon assess recovery efforts. The rain came when the corn was listening. The crisis had strengthened the garden's community. Those who had helped during the drought returned daily, invested in the outcome. Children monitored their adopted plants with fierce protectiveness. Elders shared drought stories from previous generations, knowledge that suddenly had immediate relevance. While repairing a section of irrigation channel damaged by the rain's intensity, Talon unearthed a small clay turtle, clearly hand-formed and fired generations ago. Its shell bore impressed patterns, matching some of the garden's irrigation channels. Grace's grandfather identified it immediately. "Water guardian," Joseph explained, holding it reverently. "Placed at key points in old gardens to ensure good flow. Your mother probably buried it when she established this garden." Talon positioned the clay turtle at the junction of primary water channels. It seemed right somehow. A guardian returned to duty after years of dormancy. The water crisis created unexpected opportunities. After Thomas departed, Grace remained skeptical. He adapts when forced to. That doesn't mean he's changed his priorities. Maybe not, Talon agreed. But it's progress. As August transitioned to September, the garden entered a new phase. Early crops were harvested, with careful attention to seed saving for next season. The crisis had highlighted the importance of drought-resistant varieties, and Talon meticulously selected seeds from plants that had shown particular resilience. The garden had become a teaching space beyond anything Talon had initially imagined. Local school teachers brought classes for science lessons. Community college students conducted research projects. Elders held regular sessions, sharing traditional knowledge not just about plants, but about living systems, weather patterns, sustainable cycles. Grace now spent most days at the garden, having taken leave from her tribal housing position to help document traditional practices for a university publication. Her relationship with Talon had deepened through crisis, becoming a partnership based on shared purpose. One morning she arrived with unexpected news. The Tribal Council is creating a cultural heritage committee to document and preserve traditional practices. They've asked both of us to serve. Thomas's idea? Talon asked, surprised. Actually, yes. He presented it as an economic development initiative, cultural tourism, alongside the resort concept. Talon considered this while transplanting fall seedlings. Integration rather than opposition. Smart. And politically expedient, Grace added pragmatically. That evening, as sunset painted the garden in gold, Talon placed the clay turtle in his palm, feeling its weight, solid, grounding, enduring. The garden had survived not just through his efforts, but through community adaptation, through knowledge preserved and applied, through balance restored. The house repairs were nearly complete now, the structure sound and welcoming. But Talon understood that its true restoration lay in its purpose, not just as a dwelling, but as a gathering place, a teaching space, a connection point between generations. As darkness fell, neighbors stopped by with fresh bread and stew. University researchers shared their latest findings. Children proudly showed their journal entries, documenting plant growth. The small clay turtle watched from its place at the garden's heart, a quiet guardian of flow, of continuity, of life persisting through challenge. Talon realized the drought had given an unexpected gift, proof that the garden and all it represented wasn't just a fair weather project, but a resilient system capable of adaptation. Like the heritage plants it contained, it had deep roots, capable of finding nourishment even in difficult times. Autumn brought golden light and cooler temperatures. The garden transitioned to fall crops, hardy greens, root vegetables, late-season herbs. Harvest activities continued daily, with careful attention to preserving the bounty. Talon taught traditional drying techniques for herbs, seed-saving protocols, and winter storage methods passed down through his family. The house had become a community space. The large kitchen table, salvaged and restored from his parents' original furniture, hosted regular gatherings. Garden volunteers shared meals. University researchers organized their notes. Elders told stories to wide-eyed children. During one such gathering, Elder Mary brought a gift wrapped in soft deerskin. "Found this among my mother's things," she explained, carefully unwrapping a delicate wind chime crafted from small clay beads. "Hollow reed sections and thin copper discs, garden spirits like music," Mary said, hanging it from the porch eave, where gentle breezes set it singing in soft, earthy tones. "Reminds them they're welcome." The wind chime's gentle voice became part of the garden's identity, its soft music accompanying daily work. Visitors commented on its soothing quality, how its sound seemed to harmonize with rustling corn leaves and children's laughter. The Cultural Heritage Committee took shape with Talon and Grace as founding members. Their first initiative established regular teaching sessions at the garden, creating space for knowledge exchange between elders and youth. These gatherings grew beyond gardening to include traditional stories, language lessons, craft demonstrations, cultural transmission happening organically in the context of shared work. Thomas attended one such session, observing quietly from the periphery as his teenage son learned traditional seed storage techniques from Elder Wilson. The boy had become a regular garden helper, particularly interested in the heritage corn varieties. Something about working with these ancient plants spoke to him in ways classroom education never had. The resort developers are interested in incorporating a demonstration garden, Thomas told Talon afterward. Something authentic that showcases traditional methods. Would you consult on the design? It was an olive branch, however pragmatically motivated. Talon considered carefully before responding. I'd need to discuss it with the elders. This knowledge isn't mine alone to share, Thomas nodded, understanding the boundaries. Of course. It would be a community project properly credited. This new dynamic represented progress, yet Talon remained cautious. That evening, he discussed the proposal with Grace and several elders on the porch, the clay wind chime providing gentle accompaniment to their conversation. It's co-option, Grace argued initially. Using our traditions as tourist attractions, Elder Wilson took a more nuanced view, or its recognition of their value. The question is, who controls the narrative, who benefits? Joseph, Grace's grandfather, nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the best protection for knowledge is sharing it widely, not hoarding it. Dead traditions can't help anyone. The conversation continued late into the evening without clear resolution. But the process itself represented something important, collective decision-making about cultural sharing. With elders' voices centered, as harvest season peaked, the garden hosted its first formal teaching event for educators from surrounding communities. 20 teachers arrived to learn about integrating traditional agricultural knowledge into science curricula. Talon and Grace led them through the garden, explaining companion planting techniques, water conservation methods, and seed selection principles. These aren't just historical practices, Talon explained. They're solutions for current challenges, drought resilience, sustainable food systems, biodiversity preservation. The teachers recorded videos, took photographs, gathered resource materials to share with their students. One science teacher from a neighboring reservation stayed after the others departed. My grandfather was a traditional planter, she said quietly. When I was studying agriculture in college, I was taught his methods were primitive, unscientific. I believed it, she gestured toward the thriving garden. This would have made him so happy, seeing old ways validated, respected. That night, a gentle rain fell, the clay wind chimes singing in counterpoint to water pattering on the roof. Talon sat on the porch with his mother's journal open on his lap, adding his own observations alongside hers, creating a continuous thread of knowledge across generations. Grace joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea made from garden herbs. What are you writing? That transformation moves in both directions, he replied. The garden changes the gardener as much as the gardener changes the garden. The wind chime's gentle voice seemed to affirm this thought. Speaking in a language older than words, the conversation between humans and earth that had sustained his ancestors and now sustained this renewed place of learning. Thomas's son appeared at the garden gate early the next morning, asking permission to harvest seeds from the heritage corn for a school project. As Talon showed him the proper technique, he realized something important had shifted. The garden was no longer just his reclamation project. It had become community property in the deepest sense. A shared heritage being actively transmitted to the next generation. The clay wind chime sang softly overhead, welcoming this continuation. October painted the landscape in amber and gold. The garden prepared for its seasonal transition, with many plants completing their life cycles. Heritage corn stood tall, husks dry and rustling in the breeze. Squash vines withered, their fruits harvested and curing in neat rows on the porch. The final herbs were gathered before frost could claim them. While clearing dried bean vines, Talon discovered a small object nestled in the soil, a tarnished silver bracelet set with a single turquoise stone. He recognized it immediately as his mother's, lost years ago, and now returned by the turning of earth and seasons. The bracelet was delicately crafted, its band etched with traditional symbols for water and growth. Grace examined it with reverence when he showed her. "A circle completing," she observed. "The garden giving back what was lost." Talon placed the bracelet on the kitchen windowsill where morning light transformed the turquoise into a small piece of captured sky. Harvest celebrations began with the first frost warning. The community gathered to complete the final collecting of seeds and produce, working together with practiced efficiency. Children helped shell beans and braid onions for storage. Elders supervised seed selection, identifying the strongest specimens for next year's planting. University students documented everything, creating a comprehensive record of traditional harvest practices. The Tribal Council approved a permanent designation for the garden as a living cultural heritage site, ensuring its protection regardless of future development plans. Thomas, surprising everyone, had seconded the motion. "Practical recognition of reality," he explained when Talon thanked him. "The community has claimed this place. Fighting that would be politically unwise." A pragmatic assessment, but progress nonetheless. The resort development continued, but with significant modifications. The access road was rerouted to avoid Talon's property entirely. The water usage plan incorporated conservation methods documented from the heritage garden. Most significantly, the project now included a cultural center where traditional knowledge would be shared through educational programs designed by the Cultural Heritage Committee. "Not perfect," Grace acknowledged, reviewing the revised plans with Talon, "but substantially better than the original concept." Talon nodded. "Integration rather than erasure. That's significant. As temperatures dropped, garden activities shifted indoors. The fully restored house became winter headquarters for the growing network of traditional knowledge keepers. The kitchen hosted preserving sessions where younger community members learned to dry herbs, prepare medicinal tinctures, and store seeds properly. The living room became a classroom where elders shared stories and language lessons. Thomas's son, Michael, became a regular participant, particularly interested in the traditional ecological knowledge underlying the garden's design. His questions were thoughtful, his attention genuine. Something about these ancient approaches to working with, rather than against, natural systems resonated with him deeply. "My father still talks about progress and economic development," he confided to Talon one afternoon, while helping to clean seed garlic for winter storage. "But I think this is real progress too, remembering what worked for thousands of years." The first significant snowfall arrived in late November, transforming the garden into a landscape of white. Protective mulch covered perennial roots. Bare cornstalks stood like sentinels against the snow. The irrigation channels, now dry, created geometric patterns across the white expanse. Grace arrived that morning with a proposal. The university's Indigenous Knowledge Program wanted to establish a year-round research position. Someone to oversee the garden, document seasonal cycles, coordinate educational programs. "They're offering it to both of us," she explained. "Co-stewards of the site. It includes resources for expanded planting next spring, educational materials, community workshops." Talon considered the garden through the window, its winter form both beautiful and full of potential. "Co-stewards," he repeated, liking how the word acknowledged shared responsibility rather than ownership. That evening, they sat by the fireplace Talon had painstakingly restored, discussing plans for spring planting. The silver bracelet caught firelight from its place on the mantel, its turquoise glowing like a small captured flame. "I never expected this outcome when I first returned," Talon admitted. "I thought I was just fixing a house," Grace smiled. "Instead, you helped fix a broken connection between people and place, between generations, between knowledge systems." Outside, snow continued to fall on the sleeping garden. Beneath the white blanket, heritage seeds waited in the earth, roots gathered strength and cycles prepared to continue. The garden had completed its first full seasonal circle under Talon's care, not just surviving, but thriving, not just producing food, but nurturing community. The silver bracelet gleamed in the firelight, a circle completing, a connection restored, a legacy continuing. Winter solstice approached, the longest night before the gradual return of light. Traditionally a time of reflection and community gathering, it provided the perfect occasion for a formal celebration of the garden's first successful year. Preparations began weeks in advance, with invitations extending beyond the reservation to neighboring communities, university partners, and state agricultural officials. While searching the attic for extra chairs, Talon discovered a carefully wrapped bundle tucked beneath the eaves. Inside lay a ceremonial talking stick, its wood darkened with age and handling, surface adorned with intricate carvings of corn, clouds, and mountains. A small note in his father's handwriting identified it as having belonged to Talon's great-grandfather, used to facilitate community discussions where all voices deserved equal hearing. The talking stick became central to the solstice gathering. As darkness fell on the shortest day, nearly 100 people crowded into Talon's home and spilled onto the porch and yard. Elders, children, researchers, officials, all drawn by something the garden had awakened. Elder Wilson opened the ceremony with a traditional blessing. The talking stick was passed, allowing each person to share their connection to the project. Stories emerged of remembered gardens from childhood, of traditional foods once thought lost, of renewed interest in heritage seeds among younger generations. Grace's grandfather, Joseph, spoke about watching his own grandmother plant by moonlight, singing to seedlings. "I thought those ways were gone forever," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Now my great-grandchildren will know them." University researchers presented their findings on the garden's drought-resistant techniques, data now being shared with agricultural programs across the Southwest. State officials announced a heritage seed preservation initiative inspired by the project. Teachers described student engagement with traditional knowledge shared through classroom visits. When the talking stick reached Thomas, a murmur of surprise rippled through the gathering. He had arrived late, standing at the periphery, not expected to participate. "Progress comes in different forms," he acknowledged, holding the carved wood with careful respect. "I've spent years pursuing one version: economic development, modern infrastructure. This garden represents another kind of progress: cultural continuity, ecological wisdom." He paused. "Both have value. Perhaps they can strengthen rather than oppose each other." Coming from Thomas, this represented a significant shift. The talking stick continued its circuit, finally returning to Talon. "This was my parents' home," he said simply. "Now it belongs to all of us, not as property but as heritage. The seeds planted here this year will feed many gardens in years to come." After the formal ceremony, celebration continued with traditional foods prepared from garden harvests, music from elders playing flutes and drums, children performing dances they had learned in cultural classes. The house and garden hummed with life, with connection, with possibility. Yet amid celebration came unexpected challenge. As people began departing, the university program director pulled Talon and Grace aside with concerning news. "The grant funding for next year's research position is uncertain," she explained. "Federal budget cuts are affecting indigenous knowledge initiatives particularly hard. We're pursuing alternative funding, but there might be a gap period." Later that night, after guests had departed, Talon and Grace sat by the fireplace discussing implications. Without the promised positions, their ability to expand educational programs and properly maintain the garden would be compromised. "We could scale back," Grace suggested pragmatically. "Focus on essential plantings, minimal documentation." Talon studied the talking stick, now resting on the mantel alongside his mother's turquoise bracelet. "Or we could find another way." The garden was never just a university project. The following morning brought heavy snow and unexpected visitors. 3 representatives from neighboring tribal communities arrived, having traveled through difficult conditions. They had attended the solstice gathering and returned with a proposal. Our communities want to establish similar heritage gardens, their spokesperson explained. We need training, seeds, guidance. We can offer resources in exchange. Funding contributions, volunteer labor, networking with additional tribal organizations. As they outlined their vision for an intertribal network of heritage gardens, each preserving unique traditional varieties while sharing core knowledge. Talon realized the project was evolving beyond anything he had initially imagined. What had begun as personal restoration was becoming something larger, a movement reclaiming indigenous agricultural traditions across the region. That evening, he held the talking stick, feeling the smooth wood worn by generations of hands. It had facilitated important discussions long before his time and would continue to do so after him. Like the garden itself, it represented not just history but continuity, knowledge flowing from past through present into future, adapting to new challenges while honoring ancient wisdom. Outside, snow blanketed the sleeping garden. Beneath winter's protective cover, seeds waited for spring. The cycle would continue, with or without institutional funding. The community had claimed this heritage, and communities endured. January brought deep cold and the quietest season in the garden's cycle. Snow insulated dormant perennials, while frozen earth rested and renewed itself. Though the garden slept, activity inside the house intensified. With the university funding uncertain, Talon and Grace developed alternative plans for the coming year. The dining table disappeared beneath maps marking potential heritage garden sites across 3 reservations. The living room floor hosted carefully organized seed collections, each variety documented with growing conditions, cultural significance, and specific care instructions. The kitchen became a workshop for winter crafts, using materials harvested from the garden: corn husk dolls, gourd containers, herbal remedies, while organizing his father's woodworking tools for a class on traditional implement making. Talon discovered a worn, leather-bound book wedged behind the workbench. Its pages contained detailed sketches, his father's drawings of traditional gardening tools, hunting implements, and ceremonial objects. Each illustration included measurements, wood types, construction notes, and cultural context. This unexpected treasure was both technical manual and cultural archive. "Your father was documenting everything he knew," Grace observed, as they carefully turned the brittle pages. Preserving knowledge he feared might be lost. The book became a centerpiece for winter workshops. Elders who remembered these tools shared stories of their use. Younger community members practiced creating simple implements under guidance. University partners digitized the illustrations while preserving the original book as a cultural artifact. January brought unexpected allies. The tribal casino management, having heard about the uncertain funding, offered a sustainability grant from their community development fund. Cultural tourism complements our economic development strategy, their representative explained. Though Talon suspected Thomas's influence behind the scenes, the neighboring tribal communities formed a formal coalition with Talon's project at its center, the Three Rivers Heritage Garden Network. Each community committed resources to establishing local heritage gardens while sharing knowledge, seeds, and educational materials. Regional media attention followed. A feature in the state newspaper highlighted the garden as a model for cultural preservation, with practical applications for climate adaptation. This publicity attracted additional partners: a regional food security coalition, environmental education programs, sustainable agriculture advocates. "We're becoming a movement," Grace observed one evening as they reviewed new partnership requests. From one garden to many, winter provided time for planning, documentation, and vision setting. Talon established a regular schedule of workshops in the house: basket weaving, tool making, seed sorting, story circles. The house truly became a community center, with different groups rotating throughout the week. Thomas made a surprising visit during a particularly heavy snowfall. He arrived alone, stamping snow from his boots on the porch, accepting the offered cup of herb tea with uncharacteristic humility. "The resort project is evolving," he explained, warming his hands around the mug. "The developers are impressed by the heritage garden concept, its appeal to visitors, its authenticity. They've hired a cultural consultant to help integrate traditional elements throughout the design." He hesitated before continuing. "They've asked if the cultural center could formally partner with your heritage garden program. Shared resources, educational coordination. Michael suggested it, actually." Talon considered the leather-bound book of his father's drawings, now carefully preserved in an archival box on the bookshelf. "This knowledge has always been meant for sharing. The question is how and on whose terms." "Your terms," Thomas acknowledged. "The council would back you on that." This concession represented a significant evolution in their relationship. As Thomas prepared to leave, he paused by the shelf where Talon displayed artifacts discovered during the restoration. The dragonfly carving, the turtle figure, the silver buttons, his mother's bracelet. "Your parents would be proud," he said simply, "not just of the garden, but of how it's bringing people together." After he departed, Talon and Grace discussed the proposal late into the evening. The resort partnership offered financial stability and wider audience reach, but required careful boundaries around cultural knowledge. "We need community guidance on this," Grace concluded. "It's not our decision alone." The following week brought another heavy snowfall, transforming the garden into a landscape of pristine white. Talon stood at the window, watching cedar waxwings feast on dried berries, still clinging to bushes at the garden's edge. The bird's presence felt significant somehow, life continuing even in deepest winter. Finding nourishment in what had been preserved, his father's book of drawings represented something similar, knowledge preserved through seasons when its immediate application wasn't evident, waiting for the right time to emerge and nurture new growth. Inside the warm house, community members worked together, sorting seeds for spring distribution to the expanding network of heritage gardens. Their quiet conversations and occasional laughter created a peaceful backdrop as Talon contemplated the sleeping garden and its future. What had begun as personal healing had become collective restoration. What had started as one man's project now belonged to many hands, many voices, many futures. February thaws brought the first subtle signs of seasonal transition. Though snow still covered much of the garden, south-facing areas revealed patches of damp earth, drinking in strengthening sunlight. Inside the house, seedling trays occupied every windowsill, heritage varieties starting their journey weeks before they would meet outside. Community decision-making regarding the resort partnership proceeded through a series of talking circle gatherings. Elders, youth representatives, and knowledge keepers voiced concerns and hopes, developing detailed guidelines for appropriate knowledge sharing. The process was sometimes contentious, but ultimately productive, resulting in a framework that protected sacred information while making practical growing techniques widely accessible. While preparing one of the seedling areas, Talon uncovered a small object partially embedded in the soil, a carved stone pendant shaped like a corn plant, its surface weathered by time. A thin leather cord threaded through a small hole at the top suggested it had once been worn. The carving style matched items from his grandfather's era, its craftsmanship both simple and elegant. A planter's amulet, Elder Wilson identified when shown the pendant, worn during important agricultural ceremonies. Your grandfather likely had one. The stone corn pendant became Talon's daily companion as spring preparations intensified. He wore it while starting seedlings, testing soil temperatures, and planning expanded garden sections. Its weight against his chest felt like a connection to those who had tended this land before him. March brought significant developments. The Tribal Council unanimously approved the formalized partnership between the Heritage Garden Project and the resort's cultural center, with clear provisions protecting community intellectual property. Thomas, as primary liaison, worked closely with Talon and Grace to ensure appropriate implementation. More surprisingly, Thomas announced the resort developers had reconsidered their water management approach entirely. They're adopting a modified version of your heritage irrigation system throughout the property, he explained during a planning meeting. Their engineers were impressed with its efficiency during last summer's drought. This vindication of traditional methods represented a significant shift in outside perception. What had once been dismissed as primitive was now recognized as sophisticated ecological engineering, adapted to local conditions over centuries. As the ground thawed fully, garden activities moved outdoors. The Three Rivers Heritage Garden Network officially launched with a ceremonial planting day coordinated across multiple communities. Each participating group received starter seeds from Talon's garden, along with detailed growing instructions, combining traditional knowledge with modern record-keeping. Michael, Thomas's son, took increasing responsibility in the project. Now a high school senior, he coordinated youth participation across the network, developing educational materials that bridged traditional and scientific explanations of plant biology, water conservation, and sustainable harvesting. He has a gift for translation, Grace observed, watching Michael explain companion planting principles to younger children, making ancient knowledge accessible without diminishing it. The university partnership stabilized with combined funding from tribal sources, state agricultural grants, and the Resort Development Fund. Talon and Grace accepted co-director positions with the expanded Heritage Garden Network, their roles now extending beyond the original garden to the regional movement it had inspired. One morning in early April, as dawn painted the eastern sky, Talon walked the garden's perimeter. Green shoots pushed through dark earth, perennial herbs reclaiming their space, volunteer seedlings from last year's plants. The irrigation channels, cleared of winter debris, stood ready to direct precious moisture. The garden was awakening, continuing its cycle. One morning, Talon arrived to find an unexpected addition to the garden entrance. Someone had placed a hand-carved wooden sign alongside the path, burned into its surface with the words, "The Heart Returns Home," in both English and Apache, surrounded by traditional symbols for growth, water, and continuity. The craftsmanship was unmistakably Elder Wilson's, his distinctive style evident in every curve and line. The sign's appearance felt like a blessing, a community acknowledgement that the garden had become something meaningful beyond its physical harvest. Talon positioned it prominently at the main entrance, where visitors would see it upon arrival. That afternoon, a journalist from a national agricultural magazine arrived to document the Heritage Garden Network. Her article would feature Talon's original garden alongside the expanding sister sites at neighboring reservations. As they toured the thriving space, she asked questions that went beyond techniques to deeper meanings. "What does this garden represent beyond food production?" she inquired, recording Talon's responses. "Resilience," he answered, considering the corn now knee-high, plants descended from seeds his mother had preserved, knowledge that adapts without being lost, connections across time. The resort development proceeded with unexpected harmony alongside the heritage initiatives. Construction crews working on the cultural center often visited the garden during lunch breaks, some eventually volunteering during their off hours. The project architect consulted regularly with Talon and Grace, incorporating design elements that honored traditional relationships between structures and growing spaces. Most remarkably, former opponents became allies in unexpected ways. Thomas now regularly brought potential business partners to the garden, proudly explaining traditional techniques as if he'd always valued them. Though Talon recognized the political calculation involved, he also saw genuine appreciation developing as Thomas witnessed the project's success. Thomas's son Michael had fully embraced the Heritage Garden movement. His senior project, a comprehensive guide to traditional Planting techniques adapted for contemporary application received recognition from both the Tribal Education Department and state agricultural officials. He now planned to study sustainable agriculture in college while maintaining his connection to the network. One evening, after a particularly successful community workshop on traditional pest management, Grace and Talon walked the garden's perimeter in comfortable silence. Their partnership had deepened over the seasons, professional collaboration evolving into something more personal. They now shared not just work, but a vision for the future, one that honored traditional knowledge while adapting to contemporary challenges. "I never expected this outcome when I first came back," Talon admitted, gesturing toward the thriving garden where several community members still worked despite the approaching sunset. "What did you expect?" Grace asked. "To fix a house, to make peace with memories, maybe to plant a small garden for myself." He touched the carved stone pendant that rarely left his neck. "Not to help start a movement." The timing was right, Grace observed. The community was ready to remember. The following morning brought unexpected visitors, a delegation of elders from a reservation in a neighboring state. They had traveled specifically to see the heritage garden, having heard about its success through indigenous agricultural networks. Their own community was experiencing severe water shortages and food security challenges. "We've lost much of our traditional growing knowledge," their spokesperson explained. "Our young people buy food from stores. Few remember how our ancestors fed themselves from difficult land." Talon showed them through the garden, explaining irrigation techniques, companion planting strategies, drought-resistant varieties. The visiting elders recognized elements that paralleled their own half-remembered traditions, connections that transcended tribal differences. Before departing, they requested heritage seeds and teaching materials to begin their own restoration project. The network expanded further, reaching beyond original boundaries. That evening, Talon sat on the porch as darkness fell, contemplating the wooden sign now illuminated by solar lights at the garden entrance. "The heart returns home." The phrase captured something essential about the project, not just plants returning to ancestral soil, but knowledge returning to community practice, cultural identity returning to daily life. The carved wooden sign represented not just Elder Wilson's craftsmanship, but the community's adoption of the garden as their own. What had begun as one man's personal healing had become collective restoration. The house and garden that had once stood abandoned now pulsed with activity, with purpose, with continuation, full circle, not ending where it began, but spiraling to a new elevation while honoring its origins. Like the plants themselves, growing from seeds that carried ancient memory into new seasons. 1 year had become 2, then approached 3. The garden matured into a living classroom, recognized far beyond reservation boundaries. What had begun as Talon's solitary project now involved hundreds of community members across multiple sites. The original garden remained the heart of the network, a place where innovations emerged and traditions were honored with equal reverence. During autumn preparations for the annual seed-saving ceremony, Talon discovered a small wooden chest while clearing space in the root cellar. Crafted from cedar with simple but elegant joinery, it bore his father's distinctive woodworking style. Inside, meticulously organized in small cloth pouches labeled in his mother's handwriting, lay a comprehensive collection of heritage seeds, varieties beyond those Talon had already recovered and restored. This seed vault represented his parents' deliberate preservation of cultural heritage during times when such knowledge was devalued. Some varieties were unfamiliar even to the oldest community elders. Plants mentioned in stories, but thought lost to cultivation. Each seed packet included notes on growing conditions, uses, and cultural significance. They were creating a living archive, Grace observed as they catalogued the collection, preserving not just seeds but knowledge, waiting for the right time to share it. The discovery transformed the upcoming ceremony. What had been planned as a celebration of 2 years' restoration became something more profound: the reintroduction of plant relatives long absent from community gardens. Elders from all participating communities gathered to witness seeds awakening from decades of dormancy, ready to continue their ancient relationship with human caretakers. The resort development, now nearing completion, had evolved during planning into something more harmonious than originally conceived. The cultural center featured a heritage garden directly linked to Talon's project, with educational programs coordinated between sites. Water conservation techniques documented from traditional practices informed the entire property's design. Most significantly, a percentage of resort revenue was permanently dedicated to supporting the Heritage Garden Network. Thomas, now approaching retirement from the tribal council, had found unexpected purpose in bridging economic development and cultural preservation. What began as political calculation had developed into genuine respect for traditional knowledge. His son Michael, now in his first year of university, continued active involvement during school breaks, leading youth programs and developing educational materials. The expanded network of heritage gardens addressed contemporary challenges while honoring ancient wisdom. University research documented significant water conservation compared to conventional agriculture. Food security improved across participating communities. Nutritional education programs connected traditional foods with improved health outcomes. What had been dismissed as primitive or backward was now recognized as sophisticated ecological adaptation. Grace and Talon's partnership deepened in all dimensions. Their professional collaboration expanded to joint publications, speaking engagements, and curriculum development. Their personal relationship evolved into shared life, with Grace moving into the fully restored house that now served as both home and community gathering place. Together, they balanced stewardship of growing spaces with nurturing the human relationships that gave those spaces meaning. On a perfect autumn day, with harvest in full swing, Talon stood at the garden's edge, watching a scene that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier. Elders guided children in proper harvesting techniques. University researchers worked alongside community members, documenting traditional knowledge. Visitors from distant communities observed methods to implement in their own restoration projects. The carved wooden sign at the entrance, "The Heart Returns Home," had weathered beautifully, its message as relevant as when Elder Wilson first created it. The garden had indeed become a place where hearts returned, to cultural roots, to community connection, to balanced relationship with the earth. The wooden seed chest now occupied a place of honor in the house, its contents gradually awakening to new life in carefully tended soil. Like the knowledge it preserved, these seeds had waited patiently through dormant periods, their potential intact despite years of neglect. Each sprouting plant represented continuity, ancestors speaking through green growth, traditional knowledge finding renewed expression in contemporary challenges.